Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Pinky's Out Coffee Break. I got a pretty special guest today. We're going to do some learning rather than just kind of piss taking and casual chit chatting like we've been doing in the last few episodes. It's Jack Grant. He is the coffee program manager for Coffee Downtown, which is an amazing little coffee shop on, I think it's Pender and Burrard. And also Winston, which is a more or less brand new coffee shop that's opened up in Lonsdale on 3rd and Lonsdale. He is the guy that decides what coffees are served when. He is usually everybody's best friend because of this. He's also got a massive background in coffee training as one of the lead trainers at Espresso Tech. And what we're going to do today is we're going to have a chat with him and we're going to talk about how you can brew better coffee at home and be a better barista. Hey, Jack.
Hello.
Did I miss anything?
No, you got it, mate. Spot on.
Perhaps I can add, and he has fantastic hair as well, just because we were chatting about that before we got started, especially for, the fact that we've been doing this whole quarantine thing for ages. I'm impressed, mate.
Yeah, it's not going too bad.
All right, cool. So I want to kind of jump straight into it by starting with a little bit of an intro about your coffee background, right? So you and I have had plenty of conversations outside of, a one-on-one like this. Do you want to give us in a few sentences, a kind of a description of your kind of coffee background, where you started and, how you got to where you are right now?
Yeah. Essentially, I'm from Sydney, Australia. Slightly flexible accent, given my born in the UK, but lived in Sydney for a majority of my life. So I learned coffee in Australia, and basically sort of just found myself in a barista position at the age of 18, and was it's a bit of a talent pool in Australia and for coffee interest for sure in Australia. So I just went straight for it and absolutely loved it. Loved learning about something new, and then did multiple different things. Went into a bit of specialty coffee in Australia too, and then moved to Canada, worked in ski resorts, which is not specialty coffee, but taught me a lot about how fast you can be as a barista. And then now running a coffee program for a business, 2 cafes in Vancouver, which has been brilliant.
Outstanding. And what about the coffee education side of things?
The education side basically was taught by a lot of people who are still in the industry in Australia. And then I basically just took that information and kept it to myself, essentially. And then found myself in Espresso Tech, where I was doing home espresso classes, home brewing classes, and cuppings on a regular basis before all of this COVID stuff happened. And that's been a real hit. It's been super fun getting into people sort of understanding why espresso is a certain way, and then sort of helping people along, and hopefully making espresso and brewing as simple as possible.
Awesome. And how many classes have you done at Espresso Tech?
I've definitely been over there over well over a year, maybe a year and a half now.
Nice.
Yeah.
So before I met you, actually, which I think the first time I met you, I think you were a judge at one of the competitions there. And before I'd met you, I'd already heard about your classes and how good they were. And I forget who mentioned it, but somebody had kind of given me a nudge about, I did this really cool. I think it was espresso. Would have been.
Yeah, it probably would have been at that time. We only just launched the brewing class a few months before. Yeah.
So awesome. I get to talk to you essentially for free right now and not have to pay you for this stuff. So this is great. This is me being cheap, as always. This has nothing to do with providing content and value for people that are watching this. I just need to get better as a home barista. So sucker. I'm just kidding. All right. So let's jump into actually some content about home brewing, right? So I'm going to kickstart off what I consider to be the easiest way to brew at home if you want to start learning about and that is cupping. So can you take me through a little bit of a description about what cupping is and how you would do it at home?
Cupping essentially is sort of a sensory sort of situation where you have the cup at Espresso Tech. Anyway, we start with the whole bean, then smell the bean. We usually maybe have 4 different coffees on the table, a little sheet that you can write down all what you're smelling and what you're tasting. You start off with smelling the coffee, and then we grind it. Same situation, you smell it again, and you usually get a lot more of a sensation after it's ground, when the coffee's all ground up. Then we brew the coffee, scoop the crust off, and then taste it. And I think it's a really good way of getting a depiction of what the coffee should actually taste like, whether if you're putting it in espresso or if you're brewing it. It's a really nice way to sort of get yourself in I call it like a ballpark of acceptability when you're doing coffee, either espresso or home brewing. It actually puts you in a nice position and sort of like a bit of a memory bank as to what the coffee should taste like. So if you're tasting something that's really far-fetched from what you've just tasted in your cupping, then start again.
Right. Well, one of the things I've really enjoyed with cupping, I learned it after I'd been brewing, say French press and espresso at home. And one of the things I liked about it, and why I started with this, is that it is literally something that can be done with barely any equipment. You can go and buy pre-ground coffee if you really want to, but if you have a grinder and a cup and some hot water, that literally is all that you need.
Yeah. You need like 4 minutes of your time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that being said, it's still not a very kind of fruitful way to drink coffee, because there's grinds floating around in it. It's sort of more geared towards tasting coffee rather than actually having a cup of coffee. So kind of an upgrade from that then, what would you consider to be the easiest brew method at home for someone who's just getting started?
Easiest brew method for home. I love my V60, my Harrier V60.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's just super simple for me. I mean, it's something that I'm comfortable with. But in saying that, I've had an AeroPress for longer. And I use it more for camping. And I sort of was interested in brewing when I was, skiing and all that sort of stuff, but it never really caught my eye. And then when I moved to Nelson in the interior, that's when I really got into my AeroPress and my V60 stuff. So I think, AeroPress is pretty straightforward. It's really easy to find really easy recipes for it. You can make it as easy or as hard as you bloody want. And then the V60 is a bit of a step up, I think, but I feel like I get really good results from my V60 personally.
Yeah. So take me through the brew process for an AeroPress.
For my AeroPress, I would do 14 grams of coffee. It's a finer grind from my experience than a V60. Obviously, heat the kettle up while you're doing all this. In the AeroPress, I have it inverted, so the top of the AeroPress is facing upwards. Hot water, splash about 40 mil of water on top of 14 grams of coffee. Give it a really good stir. Let it bubble away. Give it about 20 seconds. Top it up all the way to the top. Give it a really good stir. Cap on. Let it sit for a minute 20. Turn it around. Push down just an even pace. And then some people like to stop before the hissing. Some people just go through the hissing.
Right.
I've done both and I've had great results.
Simple.
Yeah, it's really easy.
One of the things I really like about the AeroPress, and you mentioned camping, is the cleanup of it is awesome.
Yeah.
You're just going to whack it and everything flies out the end.
Yeah.
And now
it's good way to surprise someone when they're waking up.
Scalding hot coffee grinds in the face. No. So why would that be an easier brew method than V60?
I think there's more variation with the V60. People sort of get obsessed with a bit of like flow rate, like how fast you pour out of the kettle, essentially.
Yeah.
Agitation, do you agitate, do you not agitate? Pre-wetting the filter, people don't pre-wet the filter or preheat the cylinder that they're pouring into, whereas the AeroPress essentially does all of that except for the glass that you're using. I think there's just a bit of often confusion with V60, but also if you treat it as if it's any food product or beverage product like it is, it's just a recipe at the end of the day.
Yeah. Very, very similar to baking, I find.
Yeah.
Lots of timing involved and lots of weighing involved.
Yeah, that's the sort of example that I use for particularly the espresso class. It's like my little intro to sort of, get the class interested, because some of them don't appear to be interested on Sunday mornings. Um, um, yeah, essentially it's espresso, or brewing is basically like baking. If you have a certain amount of flour, sugar, raisins, cinnamon. I don't bake, so I just make coffee. But
Right.
if you put too much of this in, if you put too much sugar in, it's going to taste too sweet. If you put too much flour in, it's going to end up in a disaster. And then you put the coffee into you put the recipe into the oven for a certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that certain amount of time, you have a batch of muffins, which is your coffee.
Right. All right. So going back to the V60 then. So just to describe it to anyone that's not aware of what a V60 is, it's a conical shaped brewer that sits on top of a vessel, and that can be a cup, that can be a carafe, it can be a jug, it can be anything you want. You put a paper filter in it, and you dump ground coffee into the top of it, and then you pour water onto the top of that, the coffee grounds, and it fills up the cone. And then the cone the water filters through the coffee grinds, and it comes out the bottom. So that is the really simple way of describing it. So let's say I wanted to make myself some coffee using a V60. I do everything I just said. So I grind my coffee, I put it into the cone that's got the filter in it. What do I do next?
Well, if you pre-wet the filter,
Mm-hmm.
get rid of that papery taste. And then obviously you need a scale. I think it's super important to have a scale.
Okay.
A scale is, for me, it's not, it's essential. You got to have a scale, because then you have so much control over the variables that you can have control over, like your grind and your water temperature and all that. But a scale is a basic essential. So yeah,
can that be any scale? Is that does it have to be a specific scale?
I mean, I use a kitchen scale at home, so
right.
I just got one from Canadian Tire. I mean, like a lot of people love the fancy digital scales, but yeah, I mean, you can get a really good scale from Hario, or you can just get a basic kitchen scale. I think obviously having the degree of accuracy is important too, but if you're just brewing at home for the sake of enjoying coffee, which is what I do and I love doing, I think that's the end of the day. If you have that sort of element of control, then it's super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you've got the coffee, pre-wet the filter, you put the coffee in the paper, and then you do something called a bloom, which is where the water comes in contact with the coffee. So it's usually a 1 to 2 ratio. So say, for example, you're doing 20 grams of coffee, ground coffee, you'll put 40 to 50 mil of water on top of the coffee.
And what's that for?
That is to essentially sort of pre-extract. I think it's more just to get the extraction going, get the extraction moving. I've had experiences where you put too much water on top of the brew, and or for the bloom, and it just rips all of the good stuff off the coffee. So you're just putting all the good stuff into the jar that you're brewing. And then, yeah, a lot of people, this is where the point of interest comes in. It's you can either stir it, or some people like to just move the cone around itself. Mm-hmm. Or some people just don't even touch it. Just let the water come in contact with the coffee naturally. Do that, but let that water stay in contact for about 30 seconds. And then I like to sort of finish my total brew. I like to get all of my water in about 1:30. So start in the middle of the coffee bed and pour it out the concentric circles all the way out to the end. When you get to the side, don't touch the filter paper. Okay. Start back in the middle, and then when you get to your finish point, so if you're doing 20 grams of coffee, get to about 300 mil is my end goal for 20 grams of coffee. That's my usual home recipe. And then when you've finished putting all your water in, give it either good stir, or you can, however you do your bloom. I like to match my bloom agitation with my finish agitation. So I like to keep it, either if I've stirred it at the start, I'll stir it at the end. You'll usually want to finish with a dome finish if you're stirring the V60.
What do you mean by a dome finish?
So when the coffee draws down through the cone, you'll have like almost a dome, like the coffee will form into a dome that when the water draws down through the coffee, it'll finish in a dome when you just have the coffee left over in the filter.
You mean the wet grounds are going to be?
Yes.
Like a
dome?
Yeah,
that's the one, the wet grounds.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you can either stir it, or I've seen people like to swirl the cone filter. and then give it a tap on top of the jar, which I've also seen to sort of flatten the bed of coffee. Or you can just leave it. I've had better results doing like a nice circular movement with my hand just to create a flat bed at the end. I used to be a dome finisher, and now I'm a flat bed finisher. So it's all about different experiences and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And then, hopefully you're going to be done anywhere between 2 minutes 30 to 3 minutes. And then where we go.
Nice.
Let it cool, and then enjoy.
It sounds so simple. Yeah, I know how difficult it can be. So as far as the actual, I got two questions. The first one is going to be the actual device that we use. So V60 comes in different flavors, etc. And the second one I'd like to ask you about is that I want to do some troubleshooting with you after that. So is there a specific V60 that you recommend? For example, metal, glass, plastic?
Depends on what you want to use it for. I know plastic retains heat really well, but it's kind of like the situation that if you're using it for camping, for example, you want to take a plastic one because it's going to get knocked around. I have like quite a nice glass one, but that doesn't make it too far out of the kitchen cupboard. Just go straight back in afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, the plastic retains heat really well, but the glass also has a nice feel to it. And when it gets hot, it retains its heat really, really nicely. It's purely just personal preference on what you're going to use it for.
Fair enough. I personally have the plastic V60. I actually have 4 V60s. So I have a ceramic one that I never really got into. It seemed like it was, the heat wasn't stable on it. Looks beautiful, cost a fortune compared to the plastic one, which I have 2. And I have dropped them. I've dropped and kicked them. I have dropped things on them, and they are indestructible. I put them in the dishwasher. That's basically why I use them. And then I don't know if you've used this one before, but I also have a camping V60 that has a plastic filter built into it, and the bottom unclips. And
what's the brand of that one? Is that from Hario? Okay.
Yep.
No, I'm a huge fan of there's a drip decanter, which we have at work on the retail shelf. It's like an all-in-one brew cylinder. So you have like the big sort of glass tower, and then it comes up with a plastic cone.
Yep.
And then it comes with 40 filters, and it has all the scoops and everything to like for your measurement. If you're not using a scale to measure out your coffee, for example.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good start. I use that a lot over the previous Christmas for Secret Santas and all that sort of stuff, and it went down really well.
Yeah, I've used that before. I like visually. I like how good it looks.
Yeah.
In a photo.
Yeah, no, it looks really good. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good starting point, and they're really well priced. It's like $35, $40 for the whole thing. Whereas if you just get like into a brewing cylinder, you're paying $30. So you may as well get the whole thing for an extra $5, which is really nice.
And just as a little plug there, we can buy that at Coffee?
You can buy that at Coffee or Espresso Tech.
Nice. Okay.
But I don't get commission on Espresso Tech, neither Coffee.
Okay, so go to Coffee and buy yourself that brewer. All right, so you've gone to Coffee, you've bought yourself a beautiful brewer, you go home, and the first brew that you do, you mentioned 2 minutes 30 to 3 minutes as you're finished.
Yeah.
So what happens is I've brewed it up, and it finished in 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. What did I do wrong?
Well, if you're going for, you've got all those parameters, right? 20 grams in, for example, and 300 grams out, and you've done that and it's brewed way too fast. Definitely your grind setting. So grind setting refers to, put it in a really basic way, like how chopped up the beans get in the grinder. So, the finer the grind, which means like smaller particles of coffee, you're exposing more surface area to the coffee, of the coffee to the water, and you're extracting more essentially, and it also restricts the flow of water through the coffee bed.
Gotcha.
So I would recommend, if you're brewing it too fast, use a finer grind, and then do the same recipe, do the exact same thing that you did, agitation, recipe, all that sort of stuff. And then away you go. Try that.
And that, I assume, then will work for if let's say it takes 5 minutes to brew. I suppose I do the opposite. I
Yeah.
grind more coarsely.
Yes, essentially. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So what happens if I have got myself my 2.5 minute to 3 minute brew, sorry, and I decide that it tastes a little bit too sour for me? How would I go about? Well, let's say maybe not necessarily sour. We could say that it doesn't taste the way I want it to taste. I would
Sure.
like it to taste slightly different. What are some parameters that I can start playing with in order to get closer?
Yeah. So I use this for espresso too. So when you have that base recipe, and if you're not totally happy with the brew, then that's where you can start to play. If you're getting, that timing right and your grind setting correct, that's where you can sort of start playing with the coffee. There's a load of variables that you could go into. You could change the temperature of your water. And usually for the V60s, I'm trying to brew with anywhere between 92 and 94 Celsius.
Okay.
That's kind of my personal preference for it. I feel like I get a better extraction with those sorts of temperatures. But if you feel like you're not getting enough out of the coffee, or you want some more out of it, I would potentially drop down the amount of coffee that you're putting in. So maybe drop from 20 grams to 19 grams and see if you get a difference from there.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is where it kind of gets a bit of a confusing one. If you're agitating too much, you can over agitate. So don't go too hard on the agitation. Just keep it nice and relaxed. Don't go too hard on it. Otherwise, you're just going to over agitate the coffee. And you're going to get too much of the coffee out, too much extraction.
Got it. Now, you mentioned a few different things that we can change there. So would it be prudent to change? So for example, I don't know, maybe it's too sour for me. Maybe it's too acidic and I want to tweak that. Should I then do something like, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the time. I'm going to change the weight of the coffee. I'm going to change the agitation, and I'm going to change the temperature and see what happens. Should I do all of that at once? No,
change one for me. And I still go by this. I've been doing coffee for 8 years. I just change one variable only at a time and see it. And then you'll notice the differences. And then when you start to get to know what changes affect what, that's when you start to sort of becoming a real sort of master at understanding what you can get out of coffee.
Yeah. Okay. And would this brew method be a good, like the one that you mentioned, would it be good for every different type of coffee, just to start there and start moving around the different parameters?
Yeah, I think so. From my personal perspective, I was at 18 grams. I started with an 18-gram recipe and then bought to about 250.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that too. I had great results with that. And then I was just been trying out this sort of more higher dose recipe if you get more coffee out, similar sort of ratio. So, yeah, I think it's just all about trying things out. Once you get that grind setting correct, then you can really start playing with different recipes that you find online. I often like to refer to, there's an app called Brew, which is an amazing app. It's like a step-by-step brewing process. And I think there's like maybe 6 variations of brewing that you can have on there, which is really nice. And he sort of like runs it through for you, like on a step-by-step with a timer and everything.
Oh, nice. Okay. So you would watch the app and it would tell you, okay, do the next step right now. And then you do the next step. Okay. Awesome. That's great.
It's called Brew.
I will, when this ends up on YouTube, I will put that in the link at the bottom, in the show notes or whatever you want to call them. Okay. So you mentioned once you've got your grind down, let's talk about grinders, because that, I know from personal experience, that is you start looking to that and a whole mess of crap.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So is there maybe we can talk about price points, because whenever I get asked about grinders, it always seems to come down to what people can afford.
Yeah, totally.
Will a $20 blade grinder from Canadian Tire do the job with brewing coffee?
I've heard a lot of mixed things. I've heard people who are fairly senior in the industry here say that they've got an amazing Black & Decker coffee grinder.
Okay.
Which I was kind of surprised at, but the guy was like, yeah, it actually works really well. So I was sort of, intrigued by that. I use a Paulex hand grinder, but I'm definitely looking to upgrade. But also price point is just insane for some of these, like a Commandant hand grinders, crazy price. So
I guess $400 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a hand grinder.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So is there you mentioned Paulex, which I believe is like maybe $100, $150, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. I think depending if you get the mini one or the bigger one, mine was about, I think $80.
Okay.
Yeah, but you can step it up, and go way bigger than that if you really want to.
Yeah, indefinitely, really, once you get into the professional grade stuff. But we'll focus on the home stuff. So Paulex as a hand grinder, is there any other hand grinders that kind of come in around that price point or below that you'd recommend?
Yeah, there's a Harrow Slim.
Yep.
They have that at Espresso Tech, and that's been a really popular one that people buy after the classes. That one's been really, really nice. Other than that, off the top of my head, I can't think of too many. I mean, if you go cheaper, then I don't know, you kind of get a reflection on what you purchased, I guess. Yeah. I think having a good grinder is important. I think having a really good grinder, I say this with espresso too, having a really good grinder it will definitely up your game.
Yeah.
With the way, just purely because of the way it's ground like uniformly, it's just got a really, really nice consistency about the grind. But in saying that, I just watched James Hoffman's reviews of hand grinders, and I was like, oh, my Paulex is on it, must be getting a good review. And then he absolutely slated it. So he told me basically to buy a $500 hand grinder or go home. So
yeah, I mean, so for those of you that don't know, James Hoffman is arguably one of the biggest influencers, certainly on YouTube anyway, in the coffee industry. And he gets really, really scientific in his breakdowns of different coffee equipment and the coffee itself. I've seen that video of the hand grinder showdown, and it is very, very detailed. And
yeah, it's crazy. When he does the ones about the IKEA equipment is hilarious.
Yeah, that's actually. So just for those of you that don't know, he went to IKEA and bought every single coffee brewing piece of equipment that they've got, from the crap stuff to the slightly less crap stuff. And it's pretty hilarious watching him brew. This guy has got talent in brewing, and he's brewing using what equate to basically caveman tools at times.
I know, yeah. Absolutely slates it.
So just one thing I do want to throw in from my own knowledge there is you mentioned the Harrio Mini. I've got one of those. It's awesome for travel and stuff like that. What I often try and convince people to do when they are talking about that is spend a little bit more money on the Harrio Skirton, which is Skerton. It's the same mechanism. It's the same gubbins inside of it, only it grinds much quicker, and it's got a bigger receptacle in the bottom of it for ground coffee. But essentially the exact same grinder. The reason I say that is because it's an effort to grind with one of those things. I would grind 15 grams for an AeroPress, and it would take a good 2 or 3 minutes to grind that much.
It's a good workout.
So, yeah, it gets to you. And that's more time for people to come into the break room at my work and take the piss out of me for grinding my own coffee. So, yeah. All right. Just to quickly touch on electric grinders as well, because that's another question I get asked a lot. Let's say I have a $200 budget for a grinder. Do you know of any recommendations for what you would say is a decent grinder in that price range?
I don't have much experience at all with the hand grinders.
Electric grinders.
Yeah, sorry, with the electric grinders.
Okay.
I think more there was one. I think you may have it at home, Tom.
The Encore?
The Encore. That's the one. The Encore. Yes, that's the one. Yeah. That one's been super popular, especially at Espresso Tech. People seem to be enjoying that.
It's an awesome grinder.
Yeah.
Use it every single day.
Yeah, I would honestly do some research, and then if you're looking to get one, I would definitely pop down to Espresso Tech.
Yeah.
Speak to the guys down there. They're super informative.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's electric. That's grinders done. Let's move on to another home brewing method, which I know a bunch of people are going to want to know about: espresso. Now, we were talking about this just before we kicked this session off, and how it's a bit of a black hole of A, knowledge, and B, money.
Yes.
Let's kind of throw a question that I kind of hate getting asked, but I'm going to throw it your way and see how you answer it. How does one get started in home espresso? Because it's such a big open question. What would be, maybe I can rephrase it. What's the first step someone should take when they want to get into home espresso?
I think it's more of a question of like what you want to get out of your home espresso setup. It's really, I've seen a lot of people get like a mediocre setup and it hasn't really worked out for them. But I've also seen people with an insane setup and they just have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
I definitely think it's well worth going to a showroom and speaking to someone about it, and doing your research online before you go in. I know at Espresso Tech, they sell amazing coffee machines, a lot of rocket machines, which I do all my classes on, which has been awesome to work with. Great machines, like super consistent, has never failed me in many classes that I've done.
But how much do they cost?
Oh, like, yeah, they're a fair whack. But, I mean, there's been a lot of people go for the Breville, and there's a big audience for the Breville. But from what I've heard with Breville, they don't take the repairs out to Vancouver, so it's kind of hard to get your Breville repaired. If it was to break down, you can't actually take it to anywhere in Vancouver and get it repaired. So it's one of those ones.
Don't tell Espresso Tech I said this, but if you buy it from Bed Bath and Beyond, you can take it back to them, and they have I don't know if they still have lifetime warranty on it, but it's probably a year.
Oh no,
get a new one. Not that I've ever done that before. Anyway, sorry. Go and buy it from Espresso Tech. No, I love those guys.
I think, do your research, and basically sort of think about what you want to get out of having an espresso machine at home. Do you want to be, making a few coffees a day, or do you want to be having people over and, having a proper throwdown with your espresso? Are you going to really nerd out on it, or do you really want something that's just going to make you coffee? Because if you just want something that's going to make you coffee, I would sort of suggest maybe stepping away from looking at an espresso machine, because it can be a huge investment and really pull your hair out.
I agree entirely. So the way I would look at kind of an entry level really is it kind of starts at that Breville, that Barista Express is, I had one and I got good results out of it, but ultimately I ended up getting a much, much more expensive machine than that, because I hit my limit of what I could do with it. And one of the things I guess most people don't realize is that you will not really, until you spend at least a few $1,000s anyway, you'll not really get close to what you would, for example, make at where you are right now, which is coffee.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's crazy that like the difference in working on like a big 3-group machine. It was actually quite humbling actually to do in a home espresso class, because you're literally like stripping it down. You're really, really, really back to basics. And like, just using a machine that's not like, it's a great machine, but it's like nowhere near like a huge, like, meter long 3-group head, Black Eagle. I think you're working on a little like cube size espresso machine. And it's all about becoming comfortable behind the machine, whether it's a commercial or home machine. When you start to get your flow, like home brew, like a V60 brew at home, once you start to get comfortable with a bit of a routine and why you do this and why you do that, I think that's an important thing to be as a home barista or a commercial barista, just being comfortable.
Agreed. Now, you mentioned earlier with the V60s and the pour overs and AeroPress and so on, that grinders are really important. Is that the same with espresso?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think that's so important.
For the same reasons, I assume, because of the uniformity of the grind.
Consistency. Yeah, you get maybe like a bit more less clumping, hopefully with a good espresso grinder. Yeah, I think I would always recommend people to get a really, really decent grinder, and then you can maybe like step it up for your machine, or you can sort of not go for like an incredibly valuable machine. You could sort of maybe like dull it down a little bit, but as long as you have a good grinder, you're away.
So am I right in saying then that you should spend more money on a grinder than on an espresso machine?
From my experience, I've seen people who have done the opposite of like cheaped out on a okay grinder, and have an amazing espresso machine, and they're just having an absolute nightmare. I think if you marry it up and you get a grinder for what the machine is worth, I think that's the best way to go about it.
Nice. Okay, great advice. So all right, we just went out, we bought ourselves a nice grinder, a nice espresso machine, and we're now starting to pull shots on that machine. And invariably, when you first get into it, you start to pull these shots and you don't really know what you're doing, and they kind of taste like garbage. So as a newbie, what would you recommend the steps would be in order to start getting better at pulling shots of espresso?
Same as home brewing. So have a recipe. Usually from my experience with home brewing, I'll have it's a bit of a lower dose, but you can have bigger baskets, like 20-gram basket or a 16-gram basket, for example. So depends on the actual basket size, and the basket is the part of the espresso machine handle, where the group handle, where it pops into the group handle holder. The basket goes in, which is where the coffee goes in. I tried to explain that as best I could, but I don't think I did.
No, it was good.
And yeah, that's essentially sort of how that sort of goes on. Having that, and then having a recipe. Consistency in tamping is huge. That's probably like maybe a 30-40 minute segment of my 2-hour class.
Okay, right.
Yeah, having a consistent tamp is very important. So at Coffee down here, we do our tamping manually, whereas at Winston we do with a puck press, which is an automatic tamper designed for 30 pounds of pressure.
Okay.
So I try and teach people and sort of push people away from the idea of 30 pounds of pressure, because there's no way you can measure 30 pounds of pressure with a kitchen scale or a digital barista scale. So it's kind of about feeling comfortable with your tamp, and if you do that consistently with an even bed of coffee and an even tamp, then you're away. Right.
How would I know if I'm tamping too hard or tamping too little?
I get that question all the time. It's not about tamping too hard. I mean, essentially the coffee will always remain in the portafilter. The coffee will always be there. So don't think that if you can't tamp it into the middle of next week. If you have a nice sort of solid approach to it. So I kind of like to feel the pressure of the bench. So I won't tamp down on any coffee until I sort of get a feel for this sort of pressure. If I have the tamper in my hand, I'll turn it obviously around and push the tamper down onto the bench. And sort of when I feel the resistance of the bench start, then that is something where you kind of feel on any particular bench that you're in.
Okay.
It's always something that is going to be consistent. So that's kind of the pressure that I like to apply for the home espresso classes that I like to teach. That's the pressure that I like to teach for the home espresso classes. And yeah, as long as you're doing that consistently, and obviously in the classes, we sometimes get amazing results. Like everyone's pulling the recipe at the same time. It's incredible. But in other classes, you get people of all different sizes and all different sort of pressure ideas and all that sort of stuff. But as long as you take that measurement of pressure and you take it home to your setup, it becomes your tamp and your setup and your recipe.
Okay. And consistency, I guess, is key with that. Once you've learned that,
Totally.
Do you ever change the tamp? Is that one of the variables, or should that always be the same?
Always be the same.
Okay. That's
From
good.
my experience,
one less thing to worry about.
And it's the issue with having loads of baristas on the bar. Everyone has different tamps, so therefore it changes the recipe, or it changes the extraction, it speeds it up or slows it down. So that's been the hardest thing with being like the position that I'm in now at Coffee and Winston. You have so many different people working behind the bar, and it's all about getting people under the one roof in terms of their tamping pressure, and then sort of showing how it affects the recipe.
Yeah. That's why I like those puck presses that you've got at Winston, because if there's no no variation in tamping, then it's just really another step that can be screwed up by somebody who maybe does it wrong. So the puck press, for those of you that don't know, is just a device, and all you do is you put the portafilter in it and it tamps for you. Equal pressure every single time. So, all right. So we don't have to worry about that. We do have to worry about grind size. We want, uniformity in the grind. How does the grind size affect the end result of espresso?
So if you're too fine a grind, so the grind size, your grind particles are too small, you're going to result in a bit of over extraction.
Okay. And what does that taste like?
It's kind of going to have that really bitter taste towards it. It's going to have that really like long lasting. I always taste the bitterness like in the back of my tongue. It's kind of, I sort of give away, I think, but that's just through a bit of practice and a lot of, tasting a lot of espresso and a lot of disgusting ski industry espresso.
And so that would be fine. What about if it's a really kind of loose grind? So, the particle size is really big.
You're going to sort of under extract the coffee. It could taste kind of a bit almost weak or a bit of a sourness to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of mainly sort of a giveaway. But I don't like to use the word acidity because I like acidity. So I think pleasant acidity is good if you kind of like gauge that with your personal taste preferences.
Yeah. So that, I think it's really important to kind of highlight what you just said there, because that, for a lot of people brewing espresso, is going to really fix trying to understand how they can change the end result, because there's two variables there and there's two results. And those are the two biggest complaints that I hear about espresso. I'm not sure about you, is that it's too strong and bitter, or like it's weak and gross and sour, or something similar to that. So tweaking the grind size will probably change then the flow rate, right? Because with the V60. So I'm assuming that there's probably some sort of like variable there. We want to aim for, I guess, a certain amount of time. Like you said, the V60 was 2.5 minutes to 3 minutes.
Yes.
We have something similar with espresso.
So depending on what espresso you have, so the espresso that we have on the bar at the moment, I don't like to give away a lot of my recipe secrets, but it's 17 grams in, 35 grams out in about 25 seconds.
17 grams of coffee?
Of ground coffee, and then 35 grams of, wet coffee in about 25 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, so I try and keep it to that. And then I sort of have that ballpark of acceptability where if it pulls 3 seconds lower than 25 or 3 seconds higher than 25, then it's still servable.
Okay.
I just think that, especially at this time when, a lot of every single bit of coffee matters, especially to the business, then you've got to be able to use it. You can't be super perfect about it. But if it's, if you're getting 35 grams in about 15 seconds, I wouldn't use it personally. Just give it to whoever's in the kitchen.
But I suppose that then you try it, right? You try it, and that might actually be. And I've poured some amazingly terribly made shots before, and I've tried it and gone, actually doesn't taste terrible. That's not bad at all.
There's a lot of different sort of research at the moment with lower dose, faster shot, lower yield, all that sort of stuff. My recipes change coffee to coffee, and depending on the origin and all that sort of stuff. Now we're using only one coffee, so I'm not dialing in as much. But pre-COVID, I was dialing a lot, maybe 3 times a week, which is a lot of caffeine.
Yeah. Okay. Just to kind of clarify, dialing in meaning you're like tweaking the recipe and
setting. Yeah. So or setting the recipe up. Yeah. And then going from there.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think that's probably enough data for people to use to kind of troubleshoot their brewing there. Like that's awesome.
Sure.
I want to go off of home brewing a little bit right now, and I want to chat about Vancouver coffee. We've only got a few minutes left because we went actually way longer than I was expecting to.
Yeah, I rambled on.
No, this is all good, right? So actually, before we do that, I have noticed that there's a question over there. And Alexander says, when brewing for cupping, do you use a Vario or something like that?
When brewing for cupping, was that, sorry?
Yeah.
A Vario? I usually use Harrier.
No, a Vario. It's a grinder by Barista.
Right. Okay. When I cup it for espresso tech, I'm using like an EK, so that's kind of my experience with it.
Right.
But I think honestly, if you're using that grinder like you said, I think then yeah, I usually try and grind it. If it's just coarser than a V60 grind, that's kind of my sort of acceptable cupping grind setting.
Very similar to mine, actually. I don't have a Vario. I have an Encore, but I've actually ripped the insides of the Encore out and put the Vario insides into it as an upgrade kit. And the Vario is an exceptionally competent grinder. It's really, really good. But the EK that you mentioned, so just a comparison, my Encore was $180. I think the upgrade kit was 50. The EK, if you can even find them on Craigslist, will cost you $2,500. So brand new one might cost you $4,000, something like that.
Very, very spoiled with all that equipment in it, at all of the places that I work at.
It's my dream grinder for home.
Yeah.
I got nowhere to put it. It's so big. It wouldn't fit under my counters. All right. Let's talk coffee in Vancouver if you're all right with that. So let's talk coffee in COVID. Let's talk specifically your coffee shops. So when COVID kicked off, you just opened Winston. Like it was what, 2 weeks? Maybe
it was 2 weeks. 2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. How has the bounce back been for you guys? Because now that you're open, you're actually slinging coffee out of there.
Yeah, sure. It's been really up and down. I'm there on Saturdays, and some Saturdays are really good. Like a lot of people come in there for retail coffee, and then some sort of brunch, and then a bit of coffee on the side with that. I think it honestly changes the weather depending. Like Lonsdale is crazy. I've never seen anything like it. When it's raining, there's hardly anyone out. Yeah. But when it's sunny, it's bumping. It's crazy. Yeah. There was a period of time for the past like 3 weeks. It was me and this other Aussie guy who works there, Christian. We dubbed it Aussie Saturday because like 80% of the customers that came in were all Australian. Huh. So I mean, having that sort of audience is great, and I feel like we're sort of making a nice sort of audience for us and a customer base for people to come in. There's a lot of regular people, and a lot of people from our downtown store live over that side. Yeah. So people are slowly finding out about it. But yeah, no, it's promising, but yeah, it's still got a long way to go, I think.
I can absolutely see why the Aussies come over to that shop. Is because your coffee is very similar in so many ways to coffee in Australia, which is, I mean, we got great coffee in Vancouver, but arguably the best coffee in the world is, in my opinion, in Australia. And the way that you brew, the simplicities of your recipes and the way that you use milk as well, especially, is very reminiscent of the kind of the Aussie style, which is like the holy grail over here. Everybody wants to be like a Melbourne coffee shop, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't really on purpose. It kind of just comes naturally. Yeah, I think, being in that environment in Australia, it wasn't an insanely competitive environment, but you're also, you're up against other people who are also interested in coffee. So it kind of just pushes you along a little bit naturally.
For sure. Is the coffee program very similar in coffee? We used to call it coffee with a K before we knew that you could just call it coffee. So we weren't sure if it was Kofi.
Neither was I for about 6 months, and then I found it when I'm working here.
Like, I've been here too long now, and so I'm too scared to bring it up.
Yeah.
So is the coffee program very similar in both shops?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. We had a lot of older coffee, so it was like more of a challenge for me down here downtown to how to use that a bit of older coffee. But we've now settled that a lot. We've used the majority of it, which is great.
Right.
Yeah, it's similar for the moment. I personally like to change it up and down, but keep it, receivable for everyone.
Yeah.
I like to change sort of roasters or origins and all that. Pre-COVID, I was doing it maybe every week and a half, but hopefully I'm going to try and change a few things up when our usage starts to step up a little bit more.
Yeah. Are you seeing, especially downtown, are you seeing that it's starting to get better and better?
Yeah, for sure. I think today actually was probably one of our busiest days,
Awesome.
which is great. And yeah, I think there's the massage school, which is in the building that we're in, has come back. So they're at a 50% capacity. So lots more people coming through like that.
Right.
And then it's more just, trying to get all the regulars and all of their office friends to come through, which has been definitely been the case in the past week, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, more people are coming back to the offices as well, and it will start to get busier and busier. It's great news to hear that.
No, it's been really good.
I was a regular when I was working downtown because I worked, it was like a block and a half away. And it took me a while to find, it was actually the old coffee. So it didn't have that big room. It was like I don't know, like a quarter of the size of what it was right now. And this kind of like kiosk at the front. And I found it serving great coffee. And then immediately it shut down for renovations. I was so pissed off.
I know. Yeah. A lot of people have told me about that. I couldn't imagine how small it would have been.
Oh yeah. Tiny. Okay. I think I've taken up too much of your time. We're getting close to 3 o'clock, so I'm going to let you go now. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we go? Perhaps a little bit of a plug for Jack's cold brew.
Oh yeah, the cold brew.
Yeah.
I was drinking it before, so we decided
that wasn't whiskey you were drinking.
No.
What disappointment! That you're getting progressively more pissed as we were going on.
A bit more chatty.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were basically trying to figure out a way of a lot of coffee at home situations have been popping up. So a lot of people are brewing at home and want coffee for their own place because they, a lot of people couldn't leave, or they felt like, they wanted to stay home. So put together an idea of making my own cold brew concentrate, and I'm actually brewing some at the moment, which is exciting. It's in a huge sort of toddy, like a 15 gallons of water on top of all the coffee.
Wow.
No, not 15 gallons, 15 liters.
Okay.
I still don't know all the measurements. I've been here for 4 years.
That's like 15 gallons is like, I want to say it's like 60 liters.
Too many. Yeah. And then, so we make a concentrate out of that, and then you can take it home, and we give it to you in a little glass bottle, take it home. And then we give you a little instruction note, and take it home and have some cold brew in the afternoon, which has been an absolute delight.
Nice. Okay. I think our next session, we need to talk about brewing cold brew, because that's like another 30 minutes on that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we could get that at Coffee and Winston?
Coffee and Winston, yeah. Yep. Okay. Come on by up in North Van or downtown.
Awesome. Sorry, I'll let you actually answer this properly then. Is there anything else you wanted to mention whilst we're chatting right now?
No. I just, I guess the main thing is to keep supporting the small businesses in Vancouver. A lot of small businesses, especially the coffee industry, really struggled. Just basically just for all the people that have come down to Coffee and Winston, huge thank you for all the people that come down. We really appreciate all the support that we've been getting. So that's basically that's kind of it.
Jack, that's been awesome, mate. I really appreciate all your time today. If anyone has any questions for you, are they okay to maybe pop in or to reach out to you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Send me a message at jackgrant4, or my email is naturallywashed@gmail.com.
That you're the first person that's given out their personal Gmail address on this.
It's
awesome.
It's a business email, but yes.
Oh, it is. Okay. All right. Maybe that's a conversation for after this session's done then. Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time today. For the rest of you, the next Pinkies Out Coffee break is going to be in 2 weeks' time. No guest as of yet. I'm still working on that person, but I'm trying to get, I've got someone in mind, and it's going to be awesome if I can get her on the show. If not, I'll have someone awesome for you. Keep an eye on my Instagram for more details. Jack, thanks very much for your time, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate.